You're in a cave in the southwest of England. It's pitch dark, except for one small fire, and that fire is the only warm thing for 100 miles. Outside, the last ice age is dying. Inside, something is very wrong. You're watching an old man work by the firelight. He's holding a human head, and with a small stone blade, slowly and carefully, he's cutting the face off it. You know whose face it is. It belonged to someone in your group. They died a few days ago. For hours he works. He lifts out the eyes. He takes the ears, the jaw. Then he picks up a heavier stone and starts tapping around the top of the skull, knocking off the rough edges, smoothing the rim, turning what's left into a bowl. When he's finished, he passes it to you to drink from. And all around you in the dark, you can hear the others cracking open the arm and leg bones of the dead, scraping out the soft marrow inside, and eating it. There was no cruelty in that cave, though. No anger, no violence. What you're watching is a funeral. This is how these people said goodbye to someone they loved. Every human society that has ever existed has done something with its dead. We bury them, we burn them, we wrap them, and sit with them. It's one of the oldest and most universal things we do. And 14,700 years ago, in this cave, a group of people said goodbye by eating their dead and keeping their skulls as cups. Welcome back to Pluviophile Story. Today we're using one very dark cave in Somerset to answer a much bigger question. Why do humans treat their dead the way they do? We'll find out how you tell a funeral from a massacre using nothing but old bones, why these people carved art into a body they were about to eat, and how the DNA left in this cave leads, 300 generations later, straight to a school teacher living half a mile away.
To understand that cave, you have to understand the world it sat in. For about 60,000 years, the planet had been in a deep freeze. This was a proper ice age, tens of thousands of years long. Most of Britain was a dead white sheet of ice with almost nothing living on it. Then the climate flipped, and it flipped fast. In the ice cores drilled out of Greenland, scientists can read the temperature of the ancient air layer by layer, 1 year at a time. And right around 14,700 years ago, those layers show the North Atlantic warming by something like 10 degrees Celsius. The quickest part of the change may have taken just a year or two. After 60,000 years of ice, the worst of it was over within a few decades. As the ice pulled back, grass and forest spread north, and huge herds of wild horses and reindeer moved into the new land. Humans followed the food. Sea levels were still low, so they simply walked to Britain, across a wide plain of dry land we now call Doggerland, that joined Europe straight onto the island. They found a deep, dry cave in the limestone cliffs, hung animal skins over the mouth to trap the heat, and settled in. And then, in the 1980s, a team from the Natural History Museum in London dug up the floor of that cave. What they lifted out of the dirt would take 30 years to properly understand. At least 6 people, a 3-year-old child, 2 teenagers, a few adults, and almost every bone cut, cracked open, and marked all over by human hands. There were no witnesses, no writing, nothing but bones in the dirt. Everything we know about that night, we know because a scientist named Dr. Sylvia Bello learned to read what those bones were telling her. Bello and her team put the remains under a powerful 3D microscope, the kind that can tell the difference between a scratch left by a stone blade and one left by an animal tooth. And the bones were clear. These people had been carefully butchered, with the same tools and the same skill the group used on dead horses and deer. No predator did this. It was done by human hands, on purpose. The proof they'd been eaten was impossible to ignore. Human teeth had left marks on human bone. The big limb bones had been smashed open with stones to reach the marrow inside. The bodies were stripped of their meat completely. And this is where most people jump to a conclusion that turns out to be wrong. The obvious answer is starvation. A brutal winter, no food, a group forced to do the unthinkable to survive. It happens, it's documented. But at Gough's cave, the starvation story falls apart. Because if you're starving, you eat and you move on. You don't spend half a day making a work of art out of a skull. The skulls here were treated with enormous care. First, the dead were scalped. Then the eyes, cheeks, and tongue were taken out, and the bones of the face knocked away. Finally, with small, careful taps of a stone, someone shaped the broken edge of the skull into a smooth, even rim you could actually drink from. Scientists think a single one of these skull cups took at least half a day of skilled work. That's the behavior of people performing a ritual, a funeral. There are no wounds on the bodies from fighting, no sign of a struggle. When someone in this group died, the others honored them by eating their body and keeping their skull. Making cups from human skulls sounds like something out of a horror film. It's real though, and it's not even rare. Skull cups turn up right across human history, from the Vikings to the Scythians to peoples recorded in modern times. The ones from Gough's cave are simply the oldest we've ever found. If the skull cups show these people had rituals, the next find shows they had something even harder to explain: imagination. Among the broken bones was a human forearm from an adult. It had the usual butchery marks, but along one side, someone had cut a careful, repeating zigzag into the bone. For a while, people assumed it was accidental, just messy cut marks from stripping the meat. Then it was scanned in detail, and the truth came out. The zigzag was deliberate. Whoever made it used different techniques for different strokes. Single cuts here, a sawing motion there, hard scraping to deepen the lines. Someone had taken their time to make something. This is the only engraved human bone we've ever found from the whole of Paleolithic Europe. Then the scientists worked out the order it all happened in, and it's genuinely eerie. The zigzag was carved before the bone was smashed open, because the cracks run straight across the pattern. So this wasn't an old keepsake someone doodled on years later. Follow the sequence. A person dies. The group cuts the flesh from their arm. An artist sits down and carves a careful pattern into the bare, fresh bone. And then, minutes later, that same bone is smashed to pieces and the marrow eaten. Why carve something so carefully only to destroy it? The researchers' answer is the interesting part, and it's pure behavioral science. The carving was never meant to last. Making it was the ritual. Marking that person's body, telling their story in lines cut into bone, was the whole point. In the same way that laying flowers at a grave was never about the flowers lasting. Underneath the horror of it, this is grief, a way of dealing with loss so old and so alien to us that we've almost completely forgotten people ever did it. The skull-cup people didn't last. After a couple of generations, the climate turned on them again. A surge of icy meltwater hit the oceans, the world dropped back into the freezer, and Britain emptied out. Then, about 10,000 years ago, the ice let go for the last time, and people came back to Cheddar Gorge for good. In 1903, workmen digging in that same cave found a near-complete human skeleton, a man who died in his 20s. They named him Cheddar Man, and for the next 100 years, everyone assumed he looked like a modern, pale-skinned Brit. Then, in 2018, scientists drilled a 2-millimeter hole into his skull, pulled out a pinch of ancient DNA, and read his genome. He'd had dark to black skin, tightly curled dark hair, and pale blue eyes. It turned out the pale skin we think of as typically European arrived thousands of years later than anyone assumed, carried in by farming peoples moving up from the Middle East. The oldest complete Briton we've ever found looked nothing like the textbooks had drawn him. And then there's the part of the story that sounds made up. 21 years earlier, back in 1997, an Oxford scientist named Brian Sykes tried something almost cheeky. He wanted to pull mitochondrial DNA out of one of Cheddar Man's teeth. Mitochondrial DNA is special. It's passed down almost unchanged from a mother to all her children, so it lets you trace one single unbroken line of mothers back through time. To have something to compare against, Sykes swabbed the cheeks of about 20 people living in the village right outside the cave. It was a long shot, a bit of fun really. He wanted to see if any living person still carried the same maternal line as a 10,000-year-old skeleton. One of them did. A local history teacher named Adrian Target carried the exact same maternal line as Cheddar Man. Somewhere back near the end of the Ice Age, the two of them shared a grandmother. They were distant cousins, separated by 10,000 years, but real cousins all the same. Now, this wasn't a 1 in a billion fluke. Around 1 in 100 British people carry that same line, so a living match was always likely. The thing that made the whole country sit up was where the match lived. Adrian Target taught history half a mile from the cave. And he hadn't ended up there through some unbroken family tradition. He'd applied for teaching jobs all over the country and just happened to land one in Cheddar. Pure chance had dropped a relative of Cheddar Man a 10-minute walk from the cave that held the oldest known member of his own family line. Across 300 generations, through wars, plagues, famines, and endless waves of people moving across the map, One quiet thread of DNA had passed from mother to daughter, and ended up in a man marking history homework in the 1990s. It's easy to look at Gough's cave and see only the horror, the skulls, the teeth marks, the little cup passed around a fire in the dark. But sit with it, and the cave stops being a horror story and turns into something far more human. These were people who'd lost a child, a couple of teenagers, friends they'd shared that fire with, and they refused to just walk away from the bodies. They marked them. Part of each person was kept close, and in the most literal way a human being can, they took their dead in. We don't make cups from our grandparents anymore, but we still wear their rings, keep their photos by the bed, and scatter their ashes somewhere that meant something. The specific ritual changes wildly across time and place. The instinct underneath it, to do something rather than let them simply vanish, is one of the most permanent things about us. Bones look silent, but ask them the right questions with the right science, and they'll hand you the oldest, strangest, most human stories we've got. Thanks for watching Pluviophile Story. Stay curious.